The kitten's purr was a fragile tremor, pressed into the chest of the woman lying motionless on the earth. Claire Hawthorne, stretched across a blue blanket, felt the rhythm like a second heartbeat inside her. She dared not shift. The lace hem of her dress brushed the grass, her breath slowed to invisibility. From the thicket ahead, golden eyes burned low, waiting, measuring. Juno emerged like a ghost, each pawfall erasing distance in silence. The air thickened between predator and intruder, the clearing shrinking into a cage of tension. Pip, the spotted scrap of innocence, twitched in sleep against her ribs, unaware of the predator's gaze fixed on him, on her, on the impossible bond between them. Claire closed her eyes, not in fear, not in surrender, but in recognition that wilderness itself had arrived to judge her stillness. Days earlier, the world had been rust and rot. In a collapsing barn hidden in rural backroads, silence hung heavier than any cry. Officer Dave Martinez had pushed open the doors and staggered against the stench. Inside, cages layered the dark, their bars etched by claws that had never found escape. Raccoons crammed into bird cages, foxes pacing in rabbit hutches, fur matted with waste. But in the farthest corner, silence became unbearable. Two lifeless bundles of spotted fur, discarded like nothing. Above them crouched their mother, ribs sharp against her hide, her eyes sunk in wells where fire should burn. She did not snarl. She did not lunge. She only pressed deeper into shadow, trembling from marrow to skin. At her feet, a single survivor shivered, Pip. So small his breathing seemed more wish than life. The barn carried no sound of resistance, only defeat.
The rescue was swift, grim, and heavy with a sense of too late. Juno, the broken mother, offered no fight as the rusted cage door swung open. Her frame was limp, her coat dull, her paws lifeless against steel. The kitten beneath her chest flickered with shallow breath, his tiny body seeking warmth where none remained. Martinez crouched low, watching not a predator but a ghost hollowed by grief. Two kittens gone, one barely clinging. He saw in her eyes something ancient and devastating, the emptiness of a creature who had witnessed loss so complete it stripped away her instincts. The cage floor was slick with rot, her body trembling but motionless. When lifted into a carrier, she made no sound, no protest. Trauma had consumed her so fully that survival was not an instinct, but a burden she no longer wanted to carry. The Appalachian sanctuary stretched with rolling hills and dense forests, designed as a haven, but for Juno it was another prison. She found the deepest hollow beneath rhododendrons and vanished into it, her golden eyes dim with fear. The stream glittered, the grass swayed, but she saw only danger. Pip cried endlessly, his voice tiny but piercing, a desperate plea for warmth that never came. Staff fed him with bottles, their hands reluctant, knowing each drop drew him further from his kind. Each attempt to bring him near her only widened the divide. She recoiled as though her child was a threat, her trembling body shrinking deeper into her chosen shadows. It was not rage nor cruelty, but absence. The most sacred bond in nature, severed, silent, unnatural. The kitten grew stronger, but without a mother, every new heartbeat felt borrowed, fragile, temporary.
Claire Hawthorne arrived when hope was brittle and thin. Her reputation traveled quietly, whispered between wildlife sanctuaries, a woman who carried no tools, no cages, no commands. She brought only silence. A weathered blue blanket folded beneath her arm, she walked into the clearing and laid it flat across the grass. The sanctuary team watched with unease as she lowered herself, stretched on her side, becoming part of the earth. She did not search for the bobcat. She did not call for Pip. She simply lay still, her white dress a pale echo of light against the green.
Hours slid into stillness. The air hummed with insects. The leaves shifted in breezes. And from the shadows, she felt the gaze of something ancient and wounded. Golden eyes studied the intruder who made no threat, no sound, no movement. A predator waiting to understand patience. For 3 days she returned, the ritual unchanged. The blanket spread, the body reclined, breath so shallow it was barely more than wind. The staff carried Pip back and forth, his tiny body still too fragile to survive without their feeding. But each time, his gaze drifted to the hollow where Juno hid. His cries echoed unanswered, but Claire noticed something shift. The silence between them thickened, not empty, but weighted. On the 4th day, sunlight broke sharp across the enclosure, casting the blanket like a beacon. Pip, driven by curiosity more than courage, stumbled from shadow into open grass. His oversized paws tripped over themselves, his tufted ears flicking, drawn toward the figure who never moved. Claire felt her pulse hammer, but her body remained stone. The kitten circled once, sniffing. Then, with unthinking trust, he curled into her chest and fell asleep.
The warmth of Pip's body burned against her ribs, more profound than anything Claire had felt. His purr rumbled like a miniature engine, vibrating through fabric into bone. She dared not flinch, dared not shift. From the thicket, Juno's gaze pierced the moment, sharp and heavy. The air was thick, every heartbeat loud, every second stretched into eternity. The staff held their breath beyond the fence, but Claire was already gone into stillness. She understood that this was no victory, no conquest. This was survival balanced on a thread. The kitten slept in the arms of a stranger, and his mother watched with feral intensity. It was not yet trust nor forgiveness, but it was recognition. A moment so fragile, it could unravel with one breath too loud, one twitch too sudden. The predator's judgment had begun, and Claire could only endure it in silence. Nights in the sanctuary echoed with Pip's restless cries. His small form searched for a warmth he only partly understood, and when he vanished one evening, panic rippled through the team. Flashlights swept through grass. Voices called low, but silence pressed in. Claire's chest tightened as every second passed, the darkness swallowing sound. Then, faint, weak, almost imagined, a cry answered from the far corner. Pip was discovered at the edge of Juno's hollow, trembling, desperate, but alive. He had wandered into the fortress she had built from fear, and she had not killed him. She had not touched him, only let him live in the orbit of her shadow. It was no reunion, no embrace, but it was the first fracture in the wall of absence, the first proof that she had not wholly abandoned what blood still tethered her heart.
Storm clouds gathered the following night, dragging a darkness heavier than shadow. Wind lashed trees, and the sanctuary seemed to inhale before breaking open. Rain battered against the enclosures, a rising flood clawing at the earth. Claire pressed her body flat against her blanket, the water pooling around her. Lightning split the sky, and in its flash she saw them, Juno's golden eyes burning through sheets of rain, her body moving low and steady, something clenched in her jaws. Pip dangled from her teeth, soaked and writhing, yet alive. She moved past Claire, the storm swallowing sound, her form cutting through water with a purpose that was not fear. For the first time, Juno's instinct broke through the trauma. She had chosen to carry her son. The storm was chaos, but in its violence, the bond buried deep inside her stirred awake. The floodwater surged, clawing at the ground, tugging debris across the sanctuary.
Pip squirmed in Juno's jaws, the current licking at his fragile frame. Claire's fingers dug into the soaked blanket, resisting the urge to rise, to intervene, to break her ritual. The predator's test was not hers to disrupt. Juno climbed onto higher ground, her muscles tense, her body trembling with effort. She laid Pip down beneath a ledge, pressing him against earth, shielding him with her body. Rain drenched her fur, lightning carved her silhouette into the night. But her instinct had broken through silence. She was no longer shrinking from her child. She was guarding him. Claire's heart ached, her stillness burning into her bones. The storm had forced what patience could not. It had demanded the primal choice, and Juno had answered with the beginning of motherhood reborn.
When dawn broke, the storm retreated, leaving only soaked earth and a silence thicker than ever. Pip chirped weakly in the clearing, playful at first, then suddenly stopped. The silence after his cry was not natural. Claire's body stiffened. Every rustle in the grass became a threat, every bird call too distant. Then Juno appeared, her body low to the ground, circling slowly. Her paws pressed deliberately into wet soil, carving lines around Claire. This was no stalking lunge, no predator preparing to strike. It was a test. She was drawing her territory, measuring the intruder who lay still in her domain. Claire felt the circle closing, the breath of the wild folding her inside it. She knew a single wrong move would shatter everything. Pip's silence was unbearable. Juno's gaze burned, calculating, deciding what or who belonged inside the fragile perimeter of survival. Days passed and Juno vanished into silence. The staff whispered fears, starvation, illness, surrender. Pip mewled endlessly, his body restless, his strength waning. Claire remained on the blanket, unmoving, her heart heavy with doubt. Had the storm's breakthrough collapsed back into absence? Then, faint, muffled, almost dreamlike, came the sound. A kitten's chirp, answered by the low rumble of a mother's chest. Claire followed at a distance, careful not to intrude, until she found the hollow. Juno had carved a hidden den beneath roots and stone. Pip pressed against her frame, alive, safe. It was not warmth as once known, not yet tenderness, but it was shelter. For the first time she had chosen to keep him near, chosen to carve a space where he belonged. Trauma had not vanished, but instinct had begun to fight its way back, fragile and persistent as breath.
The sanctuary's order wavered when human error fractured the fragile balance. One staff member, burdened with impatience, entered the enclosure with food too close, too sudden. The sound of a paw tearing through grass was faster than breath. Juno lunged, her claws carving air between the intruder and Claire, her body taut with rage. The worker stumbled back, panic flashing in his eyes. Claire did not move. She felt the wind of violence cut inches from her body, yet she remained stone. Juno's muscles trembled, her teeth bared. Then she retreated back into the shadows, her golden eyes feral with warning. It was not trust. It was not peace. It was survival sharpening into defense. For the first time, she had chosen not just to hide from humans, but to strike against them. And Claire realized trust and aggression both could be born of love. The next morning, the blanket carried something new. A bird, neck broken, feathers wet with dew, laid across the fabric as though placed with intention. Claire studied it with unease. Gift or warning? The staff feared the meaning, whispering of threats. But Claire understood the ambiguity. This was not cruelty, not submission. This was communication in the rawest form nature allowed. Juno emerged from shadow, her gaze unblinking, her breath visible in the morning chill. She watched Claire, not Pip, her focus locked onto the woman who dared share her child's heartbeat.
It was not recognition of kinship. It was acknowledgement of presence. The dead bird was a bridge built in blood. Threat or offering, it meant Juno had seen Claire, not ignored, not erased. In the language of survival, ambiguity was progress. It meant she was no longer invisible in the predator's world.
Pip stumbled forward, his playful movements breaking the tension. He pressed against Juno's side, small paws digging into her fur, his head lifting in search of warmth. For a breath, she recoiled, instincts clashing. Then her head lowered, her tongue dragging rough across his tiny skull. Once, twice, a gesture ancient and primal. The kitten chirped, confused, then purred, pressing closer. Claire's breath trembled but did not break her stillness. She had become the witness to something sacred. A bond, thoughts severed forever, stitching itself back together thread by fragile thread. The sanctuary staff wept from the fence, but Claire remained carved in stone, her role not participant but observer. The kitten pressed deeper into his mother's side, her grooming earnest now, her body curved around him. Motherhood was not restored in full, but the first sparks of it flared in that trembling touch. Claire awoke one dawn to find herself no longer alone on the blanket. Juno crouched inches away, golden eyes locked onto her, unblinking, unshaking. Claire's pulse thundered in her ears, yet her body obeyed the ritual. Stillness above survival. Pip slept between them, his fragile ribs rising and falling, his tiny purr bridging the impossible gap. Juno's gaze did not leave Claire's face, not hunger, not rage, something older, deeper. It was a predator's stare tempered by recognition. Hours stretched inside the silence, the morning thick with tension. Claire's muscles ached with restraint, her breath shallow, her bones screaming for movement, but she held. When Juno finally turned away, melting back into shadow, Claire exhaled a breath she had held for eternity. The silence that followed was not empty, it was charged. The wild had acknowledged her, not as threat, but as presence.
Seasons shifted slowly, and so did the bond. Pip grew stronger, his body lanky, his paws oversized, his energy wild. He played across the blanket, batting at its edges, darting between Claire's still form and the thicket where his mother waited. Juno no longer hid in absence. She emerged, watching, calculating, sometimes lowering herself to the grass where her son tumbled. She tolerated Claire as one tolerates a storm, not chosen, not loved, but accepted as part of the landscape. Yet tension lingered, sharp as glass beneath calm water. One mistake, one gesture wrong, could fracture the fragile balance. The sanctuary's safety felt temporary, a holding pattern, not a resolution. Trust was not given freely. It was bartered moment by moment, and each moment carried the weight of survival. The silence remained. It was both barrier and bridge, as fragile as the kitten who built it. One evening, Pip collapsed. His body trembled with fever, his breath shallow, his eyes unfocused. The sanctuary staff scrambled, but Claire stayed rooted. The weight of his tiny form pressed against her chest again. The blue blanket darkened with sweat, her hand hovering but unmoving. Juno paced the edges of the enclosure, her movements frantic, her eyes wild. She snarled into the air, her cries piercing the night, her body restless but powerless. Claire's heart shattered with each shallow breath. If Pip's heartbeat failed, the bridge would collapse with it. Juno's stare burned. The predator transformed into a mother mourning preemptively, her body trembling with helplessness. Hours stretched unbearable, until dawn broke and Pip stirred, weak but alive. His purr returned, faint, fragile. Juno's pacing stopped. The silence that followed was not absence. It was relief, ancient and raw, vibrating through predator and intruder alike.
The breakthrough came not in noise, but in touch. Juno approached the blanket deliberately, her paws pressing into soft earth with a weight that carried no threat. Claire lay still, her eyes soft, her body surrendered. Pip stirred at her side, stretching. Then, without hesitation, Juno brushed her flank against Claire's arm, a single, deliberate gesture, fleeting but undeniable. It was not affection in the human sense, it was acknowledgement. Predator to intruder, mother to surrogate, wilderness to patience. Claire's throat tightened, her chest burning with the urge to sob, but she held the ritual. The touch lingered for only a breath, then asked. Juno lowered herself beside Pip, her golden eyes closing in brief rest. Claire felt the heat of her fur against her arm, the wild pressed into her body. In that instant, trust and danger were indistinguishable. They had become the same. Weeks unfolded, and the sanctuary shifted into something more than a cage. A larger forested space was prepared, a place with cliffs, streams, dense undergrowth. Juno explored cautiously, Pip bounding ahead with reckless youth. Claire watched from her blanket, her role fading into witness, her patience weaving into the background. The bond between mother and son grew unshakable. She groomed him with devotion, trained him with gentle swats, protected him with feral vigilance. Yet Claire's presence remained tolerated, not erased. The wild had made room for her, as if she were stone, stream, or tree. But tension never dissolved. Trust never became peace. It remained a fragile balance, heavy with ambiguity. Claire knew it could shatter at any moment, and that was its truth. The wild was not meant to be conquered. It was meant to be endured, respected, feared, and, on rare occasions, touched.
The decision came unannounced. One afternoon, the sanctuary's main gate creaked open, the latch undone by careless hands. Beyond it stretched wilderness, mountains thick with trees, valleys echoing with silence, the world Juno once knew and feared. She approached slowly, her body tense, her golden eyes darting between freedom and safety. Pip padded beside her, older now, his youthful strength carrying the weight of choice. Claire froze on her blanket, her body ice, her heart hammering. This was not her choice to make. Juno paused at the threshold, her body framed by the forest beyond. For a long moment, she stood still, the air holding its breath. Her tail twitched, her ears flicked, her gaze shifting back to the intruder who had endured her silence. Then, with one final glance, she pressed her side against her son and melted back inside the sanctuary's shadows. The wild remained, not erased, not domesticated, but integrated into silence. Juno had chosen neither full freedom nor full captivity. She had chosen the fragile, dangerous balance between. Pip grew strong beneath her care, leaping through sunlight, stalking insects, chasing shadows. Juno watched him from high ledges, sleek and whole again, her golden eyes no longer hollow. Claire remained at the margins, sometimes lying on her blanket, sometimes standing at a distance, always still, always silent. The blue fabric, once a beacon, was now only thread worn by memory. Yet its presence lingered in every bond restitched, every instinct reclaimed. This was not a story of rescue, nor victory, nor ownership. It was a story of endurance, a predator hollowed by trauma, a child fragile as breath, a woman who weaponized stillness, bound together in silence, where love and danger became indistinguishable forever.
The sanctuary existed in fragile balance, but not all hands respected silence. One afternoon, a worker stepped too close, too quickly, carrying food into the enclosure. the rhythm of patience shattered. From the thicket, Juno exploded forward, her muscles coiled springs, claws slicing air. The worker stumbled backward, breath ripped from his chest, his eyes wide with terror. The swipe missed flesh by inches, but the message landed sharper than any wound. Claire remained still, though the violence passed close enough for her skin to prickle. It was not the blind rage of captivity. It was instinct, sharpened by protection, a mother asserting boundaries the world had once stripped from her. Juno melted back into the shadows, her breath ragged, her golden eyes burning like fire reclaimed. The wild had spoken. Silence was tolerated, intrusion was not. Patience was survival, and impatience carried cost. At dawn the next morning, the blanket was no longer empty. Across its soft folds lay a bird, neck broken cleanly, feathers still damp with dew. Claire studied it without moving, her heartbeat a low thrum in her ears. To the staff it looked like threat, a warning delivered in blood and bone. But Claire knew better. In the language of predators, it was not violence, but acknowledgement. Juno emerged from the shadows, her gaze fixed on Claire, not her son. She had marked the intruder not as prey, not as enemy, but as presence. The bird was neither gift nor curse. It was a bridge, fragile and dangerous, woven from instinct. The wild did not explain itself. It tested. It judged. It demanded endurance. Claire's body remained stone, her breath measured. She understood. In this fragile negotiation, survival was spelled in silence, not words.
The fragile thread between mother and child stitched tighter in the days that followed. Pip stumbled forward one morning, pressing his spotted body against Juno's flank. For a moment, her muscles coiled and recoil, memory colliding with instinct. Then, slowly, her head lowered, her tongue dragging rough across his tiny skull. Once, twice, the kitten chirped softly, confusion melting into trust, his purr trembling into the air. The sanctuary hushed, the staff frozen at the fence line, but Claire remained unmoving. She was witness, not participant, her stillness protecting the sanctity of the moment. Juno groomed him again, more insistently, her body curling around his fragile frame, her warmth becoming shelter once more. The broken bond was not whole, but it was alive again. Fragile, dangerous, sacred. A thread reforged in silence and storm, proof that the wild could bend but would not break. Claire awoke to wait at her side. Not the kitten, but the mother. Juno crouched close, her golden eyes fixed on Claire's face, unblinking, unreadable. The air thickened, every breath sharpened into blades. Pip slept between them, his ribs rising and falling, his tiny body the bridge holding predator and human inches apart. Juno's gaze pierced, not with rage, but with calculation. She was not looking at prey. She was not looking at threat. She was looking at presence, the stillness that had endured storms, danger, and silence. Hours passed in that standoff, Claire's muscles locked in ritual. When Juno finally turned, slipping back into thicket shadows, Claire exhaled the breath she had held for eternity. The moment had not broken trust. It had defined it. The predator had acknowledged the intruder, not as kin, not as enemy, but as something else entirely.
Time passed, measured not by clocks but by seasons. Pip grew lanky, his paws too large, his body restless with the play of youth. He tumbled across the blanket, batting at its edges, chasing insects, leaping recklessly into grass. Juno watched from ledges, her coat thickening, her eyes sharp once more. She no longer hid, no longer recoiled. She tolerated the silent figure lying across the clearing, the human who had never moved except with patience. Trust had not become peace, but it had become permanence. The sanctuary grew with them, new space, deeper forest, taller cliffs. Yet tension remained sharp beneath calm,
This was not taming. It was coexistence, temporary and fragile. The staff spoke of success, of healing, of victory. But Claire knew better. The wild was not conquered, it endured, and it tolerated. And its tolerance could always be withdrawn. One evening, Pip collapsed into fever. His body shivered, his breaths shallow, his eyes dulled by sickness. Claire held him against her chest, his warmth weak, fading. The blue blanket soaked with sweat beneath his body, her stillness cracked by the ache in her throat. Juno prowled the edges of the enclosure, her movements frantic, her cries sharp into the night. She paced and circled, her claws digging lines into earth, her gaze locked on the fragile bridge between them. Claire fought tears, every heartbeat of the kitten pressing time thinner, sharper. If his breath failed, the fragile thread binding them all would collapse with it. Dawn came slow, cruel, but Pip stirred weakly. A purr rattled his chest, faint but alive. Juno stopped pacing, her body stilling, her eyes softening. The silence that followed was no longer empty. It was relief, raw and primal. The bond deepened not with spectacle, but with touch. Juno approached the blanket deliberately, her paws pressing into soft soil with the weight of decision. Claire lay frozen in patience, her breath a whisper. Pip stirred at her side, his body warm, his purr faint. Then Juno brushed her flank against Claire's arm, a deliberate, fleeting gesture. It was not affection, it was acknowledgement. Predator to intruder, mother to surrogate, wilderness to patience. Claire's throat tightened, but she did not move. The brush lingered for a breath, then passed. Juno lowering herself beside her son, curling around him in protective stillness. The heat of her body pressed against Claire's arm, wild and dangerous, but no longer hollow. In that moment, trust and danger became indistinguishable. The predator had allowed presence, and in silence, the wild had stitched itself into something almost like grace. The day came without warning. The sanctuary's main gate swung open, its latch loose, the wilderness beyond stretching vast and unbound. Juno approached slowly, her body tense, her ears pricked. Pip padded beside her, lanky now, restless with youth, his golden eyes wide with possibility. Claire sat frozen, her blanket a faded island in the grass, her breath stillness incarnate. The forest waited, shadows thick with freedom, silence filled with the unknown. Juno paused at the threshold, her muscles taut, her tail flicking. For a long moment, the world held its breath. She turned her head once, gaze sliding from her son to the woman who had endured her storms. Then she pressed against Pip and melted back into the sanctuary's shadows. Freedom had not been chosen. Captivity had not been accepted. What remained was the fragile balance of survival, wild, uncertain, enduring.